A dead man was pulled from the ocean, but he had already been seen alive, just days earlier. That's what Devon police were struggling to understand in the summer of 1996, when two fishermen, working off the coast of Brixham, pulled a man's body out of the sea. He was fully clothed, wearing a long-sleeve shirt, trousers and brown shoes. A Rolex still ticked on his wrist, but there was no wallet, no ID, just a strange, faint tattoo on the back of one hand, possibly a maple leaf. It looked like a simple drowning. Maybe he'd fallen off a boat, unnoticed. Maybe he'd died at sea. But the body didn't look like it had been underwater for long. There were no signs of natural decay. And then there was that head wound, a deep gash too clean to be an accident. When police traced the Rolex, it led them to a small jeweler in Yorkshire. The watch had been repaired there years earlier under the name Ronald Platt. That name changed everything. They contacted a man named David Davis, who claimed to be a friend of Ronald's. Davis confirmed the photo, said Ron had gone missing. Nothing suspicious, just a man who had been drifting lately, maybe a little lost. It seemed like the case was nearly closed. The body was identified. No one had reported foul play, just some final formalities left to wrap up. But then an officer showed up at the wrong farmhouse. He was looking for Davis, but the woman who answered said, "Oh, that's Ron Platt's place." Ron Platt? The dead man? Somehow, someone was now living under the name of the very man police had pulled from the ocean floor. And that someone was David Davis. Ronald Platt was, by all accounts, an ordinary man. He didn't make waves, didn't seek attention. He was quiet, soft-spoken, and lived a simple life in southern England. He spent 10 years with a woman named Elaine Boyes. Though they eventually separated, they stayed close. Elaine often described Ron as calm and kind. Someone you could trust, someone you'd feel safe around. He wasn't ambitious in the traditional sense. He worked hard, kept to himself and painted in his free time. He didn't crave money or power, but someone else did. That someone was a man who called himself David Davis. Elaine met Davis at the fine art auction house where she worked. He walked in one slow afternoon and started chatting, first about paintings, then antiques, then about her. He was tall, well-groomed, well-spoken. He had a polished manner and the kind of confidence that instantly drew people in. They talked for over an hour. He seemed intelligent, wealthy, and generous. And soon enough he was part of Elaine's life, and then Ron's. Davis told them he ran a company called Cavendish Corporation. It sounded prestigious. He offered both of them roles as company directors, a business opportunity, he said. He even had rubber stamps made of their signatures so he could sign documents on their behalf while they were away. At the time, it didn't seem strange. It just felt efficient. Then came the Christmas gift, 2 plane tickets to Canada. Davis painted a picture of opportunity. A fresh start overseas, a new chapter. He'd stay behind and manage the company. Ron and Elaine, meanwhile, would start a life in Canada, staying connected through the business. It all seemed exciting, legitimate, so Ron and Elaine left. But not long after arriving in Canada, things started to feel off. Elaine ended the relationship and returned to England. When she tried to contact Davis, he was gone. No address, no forwarding information, just silence. What she didn't know was that Davis hadn't vanished. He had simply changed his name. He had started living as Ronald Platt. By 1995, David Davis, or rather, the man pretending to be David Davis, had built himself a new identity. He was no longer just Davis. He was now Ronald Platt. He had Ron's name, Ron's birth date, Ron's national insurance number. He was living in Ron's house, using Ron's documents and running Ron's life. To everyone around him, he was just another quiet Englishman with a nice boat and a vague job in finance. And for a while it worked, until the real Ronald Platt decided to return to England. That return was a problem. The real Ron had no idea that someone was walking around using his identity. But Davis, or as the world would soon learn, Albert Johnson Walker, knew the truth. If Ron stayed in England, there'd be 2 people using the same name, same date of birth, same everything, and if anyone looked closely, it would all fall apart. Walker had built too much on that stolen name, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. That's when he made his move. He invited Ron out on his boat, a small yacht called Lady Jane. It was a quiet outing, just the two of them. They'd been friendly in the past, and Ron likely saw no reason not to trust him. What happened next was never seen by another soul, but forensic evidence painted a grim picture. Ron was struck on the head, hard enough to knock him unconscious. Then, while he was still alive or perhaps only moments from death, an anchor was fastened to his belt. Not tied around him, but cleverly attached through the leather to keep the body from surfacing. Then Walker, calm, methodical, rolled him overboard. And just like that, Ronald Platt disappeared beneath the waves. But even the best plans have flaws, because no one can control the sea forever. The body in the net might have stayed anonymous, just another cold case, if it weren't for one thing, the Rolex. It was a small detail almost missed, but a Rolex doesn't just tell time, tells a story. Inside each watch is a unique serial number. Police traced that number back to a repair shop in Yorkshire. It had been serviced under the name Ronald Platt. That led them to a man named David Davis. He told officers that yes, he knew Ron. They'd been friends. Ron had vanished recently, possibly moved abroad. Davis even handed over a photo to help with identification. He was polite, cooperative. There was no reason, at first, to suspect him. Case closed, or so it seemed. Then, by sheer luck, an officer made a mistake. He knocked on the wrong farmhouse door while trying to follow up with Davis. The woman who answered said something unexpected. "Oh, you mean Ron Platt? He lives right next door." That's when it all fell apart. Police realized that Davis, the man they'd already spoken to, wasn't who he claimed to be. He was living under Ronald Platt's identity, the very man who was now dead. And Davis? His real name wasn't Davis at all. It was Albert Johnson Walker, a wanted Canadian fugitive who had vanished years earlier with millions in stolen investment funds. He'd fled the country with his teenage daughter, posing as husband and wife, and had been living under false names ever since. Now everything made sense. Walker hadn't just stolen Ron's name, he had killed to protect it. From there, the investigation moved fast. Police searched Walker's home and found gold bars, stacks of cash, and documents linking him to Ron's identity. On his boat, they discovered Ron's blood and hair, plus a shopping bag that had Ron's fingerprints, the same bag used to carry the anchor. It was enough. Albert Walker was arrested at gunpoint in a taxi. Still calm, still pretending, but the truth had caught up with him. In June 1998, Albert Walker, the man who had once convinced nearly everyone he met that he was someone else, finally stood trial for murder at Exeter Crown Court. By this time, the story had shocked not only local police, but two countries. Canada had been searching for Walker for years. He'd once run a financial company and disappeared with over $3 million in client money. He had vanished without a trace until now. In court, Walker didn't act like a man caught red-handed. He was calm, composed, still charming. He smiled, joked with the judge, and stuck to his story. He said Ron's death was a tragic accident. He claimed they were on the boat together when Ron somehow slipped, hit his head, and fell overboard. He denied attaching an anchor or doing anything to harm him. It was, according to Walker, just an unfortunate incident at sea. But the evidence told a different story. Forensics had found Ron's blood on a cushion in the yacht, a belt with zinc traces matching the anchor, fingerprints on the bag used to carry the anchor. GPS records showed the boat was exactly where Ron's body had been found, on the exact weekend he disappeared. And most importantly, Walker had been living as Ronald Platt in the weeks after Ron's death. The prosecution made it clear, this was not an accident. This was a calculated, deliberate murder, carried out by a man who needed Ron gone in order to keep his stolen life going. And then came the testimony that truly sealed it, from Walker's own daughter, Sheena. For years, she had pretended to be his wife. She had traveled with him, lived under aliases, and raised her own children with him. Now, she told the court that her father had kept secrets from her, even about Ron's disappearance. She had no idea he'd even met up with Ron again. Her testimony showed just how deep Walker's lies had gone, even within his own family. It took the jury just 2 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty. Albert Johnson Walker was sentenced to life in prison. A fraudster, a manipulator, and now a convicted murderer. After the trial, Albert Walker showed no signs of remorse. He never apologized, never explained. Even as the truth came out piece by piece, he stayed calm, collected, almost proud of the life he'd built through deception. He'd lived as someone else, convinced nearly everyone around him that he was a kind, respectable man. But underneath the mask was a predator, one who saw trust as a weakness to exploit. For Elaine Boyes, the aftermath was brutal. She had trusted both men, Ron and Davis, and had unknowingly introduced them. She spent years believing Davis was a friend. She even helped him start his business. In the end, she realized he had used her to get to Ron, and then used Ron to disappear again. It was a betrayal that went far beyond money or lies. It was personal. Ronald Platt's family never got the closure they deserved. There was no final goodbye, no warning signs. Just a quiet man, murdered by someone he thought he could trust. His life was taken not out of hatred, but for convenience. Because he became an obstacle to a lie, Walker was later extradited to Canada to serve the rest of his life sentence. There, he faced additional fraud charges and the weight of what he'd done, not just to Ron, but to the dozens of people he'd stolen from over the years. Clients, investors, friends, family, his own daughter. But the justice system could only go so far. No punishment could give Ron Platt his life back. No verdict could undo what had been done. This case is a haunting reminder that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a businessman, a neighbor, a friend, someone who smiles at you while calculating your value or your silence. And sometimes the scariest criminals aren't the ones who hide in the shadows. They're the ones who stand right beside you, pretending to be someone they're not.